Hey, welcome back. Okay, in this section, we're going to talk about the two phases of parenting. Now, you may say this is an oversimplification, and I wouldn't disagree with you. You can take from age 0 to age 18, and you can slice it down to as many parts as you want. But I want to reduce the complicated to the simple and look at the two basic phases of parenting. There's the point and click phase. This is when they get out of the baby stage and they're 2, 3, 4 years old, right until they hit the adolescent phase, which is somewhere between right around 10 to 13 to 14 years old. Okay, that's the separation that I make when you're doing actual parenting, and you can have a real conversation with the children. So we're going to look at these two phases. It's how we're going to break it down, and this will make it simpler for you to understand this training. So let's look at the point and click phase. This is age 0 to somewhere between 10 and 13. Remember, everybody develops at a different rate, and there's even sex differences. Like females will develop quicker than males. They'll mature a little bit faster. So in the point and click phase, the child's an absolute delight. They listen, they take instruction well. That's why we call it point and click. I tell them what to do. They're like on a remote control. Think of it that way. And they're a lot of fun to be with. You can hug them, you can kiss them, you almost can't spoil them too much. You can, so be careful. But it's very difficult to do. Why? Because they can take a lot of praise. They can take a lot of love. When you have to consequence them, you can keep it very mild. Because this is the point where relationships are usually very strong. Why? Because they have yet to be tested. And as long as you're doing a good job as a parent, you probably won't have any issues during this phase. This is also a phase that creates a massive illusion for parents and some bad habits. Like I said, you almost can't spoil a child too much during this phase. So what'll happen is you'll carry that on into the adolescent phase, all these old bad habits, and it's almost like the light has changed and you don't realize it. You've gone into a new stage and you haven't transitioned. So you just keep doing everything that you were successful with all along, and you just keep going. Wrong style of parenting for the wrong phase, and you lose. And then you'll blame the child and say, oh, the child became spoiled. I don't know what the hell happened. They were doing great for so long. They just became this adolescent terror, and they turned on me, and blah, 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 blah. But I'll look back over the history, and I'll say, no, that's about how they're going to turn out. If you spoil your child all the way through till they leave the house, what'll happen is you'll have a high level of love, and one of two things will happen. They'll continue to be great with you because they love you so much, but they won't know how to deal. They won't have a thick skin. Every little thing will crush them. They'll expect to be spoiled for life, and they'll get out there when they're 18, and life will crush them because life isn't going to make everything fair. Life isn't going to kiss their butt. Life isn't going to swoop in and save them every single time, and they will get crushed, and that's actually your best case scenario. They'll get crushed, but you have no problems with them. Now, in about half the cases, or about 40% of the cases, 30% of the cases, somewhere in there, a little less than half, they're going to turn on you. They're going to say, hey, I can give you hell because I can. And they're gonna. Or they get frustrated in life and they take it out on you, and they learn that you accept that and that works, and you keep spoiling them and putting up with it, and they turn on you. And that'll happen a good chunk of the time. And you'll say, why? I was such a good mom. I was such a good dad. I gave him everything. And you'll start crying and you get tissue. And your friends will say, yeah, I seen you were so good to them. Why are they so bad to you? Evil child. No, you set this up, and that's the way the seed grew. Okay? You didn't readjust it. You didn't switch your parenting style. You'll feel justified, and you'll feel like you're in the one-up position. You're holier than thou, but no, you created that child. So let's look at the next phase. Now, in the point, let's continue with this phase, the point and click phase. Not that children can't be challenging. They'll react a little bit. They'll give you a hard time. So I don't want to tell you it's all roses and flowers when they're a little kid, but they are so easy to adjust compared to an adolescent. It's nothing like the adolescent phase. If you've already had one child, you know this. If you haven't, wait for it. Kids are relatively easy to deal with. It's not 100%, but they will give you a false perception that you're a great parent in that 0 to 10 to 13 year range because they present so few challenges. But you don't know. You do not know. You have yet to be tried until you hit that adolescent phase. So, the adolescent phase. This is the phase at which you regret having been given the ability to reproduce. I say that as a joke, but some of you will be like, no, Paul, that's just about right. Okay? Because maybe you are having challenges or you have been through this already. Okay? So, I say it in a humorous type of way, but this is where you find out if you're a good parent or not. Why? Because during the adolescent phase, this is where they do all their shifts. This is where they do all their changes. We're going to talk more about that later, but be thinking about that as you go through. This is where you truly find out, you know, when the rubber hits the road, if you're a real parent. And it's so important. I'm going to say it one last time. Make the shift. So, what is the adolescent phase? Adolescent phase is the time that the child transitions into an adult and begins to know the challenges and pains of being an adult. So, they are going to try to become independent, pull away from you, and you're going to feel that. They're going to test themselves against you, which means challenge you, okay? And they're going to go through pains that they don't understand. And sometimes they're going to try to be independent and solve them on their own, and you know, they'll have these depressed and dark periods, and other times they're going to come back. Oh, mommy, daddy, you know, save me. And they're going to be, you know, they want the warmth and security of the family because they're not getting it outside the home. Or something bad has happened. They want to be comforted like any human being wants to be comforted. So you're going to have this wild thing where they're getting closer, pulling away, getting closer, pulling away. You know, they used to love to go around and drive around with mommy and go to all these places, or, you know, their daddy was their best friend. And then all of a sudden they're like, you know, when you drop me off at school, can you stop a block before the school so the other kids don't see me riding with you? So, you know, they're trying to be a little bit more independent. They're trying to separate. It's a tough stage. But if you navigate it with skill, you've learned the skills, you'll be all right. Now, during the adolescent phase, it's going to become all about their friends. This is a neurological change that happens in your brain. We are social creatures. Actually, little tiny kids, 0 to like really up to somewhere between 5 and 7, aren't that social. They play with other kids, but look how hard it is to teach them to take turns. Why? Because they just want to have fun and they don't actually care about that kid sitting next to them. That's a slow neurological development which takes 7, 8, 9, really up to 10 years of age to really kick in. And then somewhere between 7 and say 13, 14, 15, it really starts kicking in, almost like a sex drive to be social, and it's in overload. And then friends become everything. This is why I say, well, they listen to their stupid friends, but they don't listen to me. Sometimes the emotional connection is higher with the friends, or they can say things to the friends that they feel they can't say to you, okay, because it's embarrassing. Or they think their friends are actually smarter than you because, quote unquote, parents don't understand. Because kids are starting to learn new concepts. They think they know them, but they don't understand them at your level. And when you talk to them in a way that they have yet to have the neurological wiring to understand, you're actually talking over their heads. It's not because they're not listening. They can only intellectually handle half of what you're saying. Remember, their brain isn't going to be fully hardened and fully complete until they're 21. And remember, judgment comes in last. So, during the adolescent phase, hypersexual, hypersocial. Now, it becomes all about their friends, but some of which are going to stab them in the back. So sometimes they're not going to listen to you, and then other times they need that warmth and support and comfort from you because their friends just stabbed them in the back, and they are stunned. Even though this happened a little bit, you know, in grade school when they were younger, you know, grade 1 through 5, you know, then grades 6 through 8. So they saw it in elementary school, they saw it in middle school. It still stuns them in high school because they think, well, now I'm a better judge of people. We're more mature now. We're in high school now. We're not going to do this. Oh, no, this is classic high school. And they're like, darn, I thought high school finally would be the end of it. Then, of course, as you become an adult, you say, oh, I got rid of all that stuff. That was so grade school. That was so high school. Now I'm going to get out there with real adults that don't act like little kids. And what do the adults act like? They don't act much better than teenagers. They just find more sophisticated ways to let you down and to stab you in the back. which is why you have a PhD in how to help your kids handle this. But you have to say it, and we'll go over this later, in a way that they can hear it. So that physically, you're saying it emotionally in a way that they can hear it, but also intellectually in a way that they can hear it. You're not talking over their heads, and that is so easy to do. Kids' brains are developing at a certain level, and if you ever study Piaget, there's certain levels at which kids can understand things. Neurologically, they can understand them, and other areas where it's a ceiling, they can't go any farther than this. You can only explain things up to a certain level, and they can't understand it anymore. So there's a do they want to listen part of understanding. There's a explaining it well part so that they can understand it. And then there's a mental part, physical, brain wiring, neurological, neurochemical part. Are they even capable of understanding it? So remember, there's all three components there. Now, during this adolescent phase, they're going to struggle to become independent and make their own choices. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but this is key. So, what are they doing? They're trying to figure out how they can be independent, and you want them to do this. So it's almost like as a parent, you want to give them some advice, but you don't want to give them too much advice. You want them to do what you tell them, but you also want them to not do what you tell them. Why? So they can find out what happens when they don't listen to you. It's called natural consequences. Something bad will probably happen when they don't listen to you. That's good information for them to have. They also have to try things on their own and fail. I guarantee you, if you tell a child something and then they don't listen to you, they're going to try it on their own and fail, and your advice gets sexier and sexier and sexier, more attractive every single time they fail. Why? Because they begin to get the gift of desperation, and then they'll start to listen to you. So it's okay for them to make some of these mistakes. If they don't become independent, think of the alternative. They become dependent on you for how long? For life. And these kids will get squashed like grapes in the road of life. This is not good. Your job is to not raise a child. It's to raise a responsible adult. We're going to talk more about that later. It's to take them from dependent to independent, and even if you want to be an exceptional parent, teach them how to be interdependent. So dependent, they need you for everything. Independent, they can do things on their own. And interdependent teaches them that we win by working with others. Okay? We win by working as a team. We're actually interdependent. So you don't want them to be dependent. You don't even want them to be too independent. I'm a rugged, independent American. I'll do everything on my own. We call you loser because reality is we're actually interdependent. People that work well with others, work as part of teams, know how to put good teams together, know how to tap into the resources of friends and contacts and things like that, they do exceptional. People that are highly independent, they're lucky if they can work at a steel factory or something, put screw on nuts or do a welding job or, auto mechanic, something where you don't have to depend on anybody else, be an accountant, or a lawyer that works by themselves, or an architect. They have to work jobs like that and keep their nose to the grindstone just to get by. Everybody else is interdependent, and that's how they become massively successful. So they're going to go back and forth with this struggle to be interdependent, and it's going to go between independent, dependent, independent, dependent. And they're learning about making their own choices. So it's a great time to talk to them about choices and how to make choices. Just float the ideas across, Here's some things that I did. Here's what makes sense to me. Here's why I think this makes sense. Zero pressure. Teach them how to think about thinking, how to choose, how to make choices. Does that make sense? Because they're learning these thought systems. So if you just give them the answer, I would do it like this. This is what you should choose. They're not learning how to think for themselves. That makes them dependent. To become interdependent, you not only have to teach them what is the right choice, why it's the right choice. And they have to make millions of choices. You will not be with them when they're making most of these choices. When they turn 18, they're out on their own. But if you taught them good, solid wisdom about how to make choices, logic systems, critical thinking skills, then they'll get it. So that's your job as a parent. Understand these struggles between dependent and interdependent. Help them become independent, and then ultimately interdependent, and help them understand how to make choices. Now, Some of the ways that they practice becoming independent is by arguing, questioning, rebelling. And remember I said they become highly social during this period, just like they become hypersexual? Adolescence is a time where you become hypersexual, that's classic. Hypersocial, which most people don't think about. But you also become hyper emotional, okay? Maybe the women out there will understand this. You know, you're having a hormone fluctuation and you try to explain it to your man, he doesn't get it, but your emotions are going like a roller coaster, okay? This is a hormonal phase, male and female go through, and they are hyper emotional during this period of time. This is the most emotional period of time. And it literally doesn't calm down until they're in like their mid-20s. I would say from about age 13 or 14 to about age 22 or 23, right around in there, hyper emotional, at least to the age of 21. So it's not over. You say, oh, they're 18 or they're 20, they're past that. Oh, no, 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 no. No, they're winding down, but they ain't past it. It's usually about 23 to 25 where that stuff stabilizes. So your child's going to go through some dark periods because of the emotional content and because they're dealing with these challenges for the first time. And here's what I can tell you about the first time you do something. You stink. The only thing you do perfectly the first time is screw up. So I tell people, don't be afraid to screw up. And don't be afraid to be bad at something. Because here's the stages that you go through. Like I said, the only thing you do perfectly the first time is screw up. So here's what you start at. When you try anything for the first time, it's called you stink. Then if you practice a little bit and you try it a few more times, you don't just quit and say, oh, I'm never going to do that again and hide. If you keep practicing, you'll get to you stink less, and then you'll be bad at it, and then you'll be not so great, and then you'll be okay, and then you'll be good, and then you'll be great, and then you'll become excellent. But the only way you get from you stink to excellent is you got to go every step along the phase. There's no way to go from you stink to excellent. You have to hit every stair along the way. You got to take every single step. So they're not going to get this. They're going to try stuff. They're going to fall down. They're going to feel like they're a massive failure. The thing they have the most of is emotions, and the thing they have the least of is emotional control. The thing they're going to have the most of is new experiences, and the thing they're going to have the least of is history and experience. So they lose two different ways. And parents just think they're younger versions of themselves. Most of us can't remember what it was like. I mean, they're not wrong when they say, oh, you don't understand. You do understand because you had to go through 16, 17, and 18 to hit 40. It's a requirement. That's life's law, not mine. But it's been so long since we were an adolescent. We have what's called confirmation bias and edited histories. One of the ways we protect our self-esteem is when we look back on our history, we remember ourselves better than we were. We saw ourselves dealing with things better than we did. We remember it better. It's just Psychology 101 says we've lied to ourselves, and it's okay, it helps, but we're not accurate. So we think that back when we were a teenager, we dealt with things about twice as good as we did, maybe 4 or 5 times as good as we did. We think our behavior was better, that we were kinder than we actually were. We think we were better in almost every way, shape, and form than we actually were. And that's why parents always say, what the hell is wrong with kids these days? Nothing. They're doing the exact same thing that you did. The human animal is like a simple monkey. We never really evolve as a species because we don't live long enough. By the time you're 75 or 80 and you've really figured out how life works, you're dead. And your kids don't listen to you enough to pick that up, so there's no generational growth, and then everybody goes through the loop again. So human consciousness has reached saturation point. And in these early stages, the kids don't have enough experience. Later you do, but you remember it differently, and you don't quite remember it the way it was. So kids are going to go through these dark periods. They're going to argue too because they don't understand the higher level thinking that you're using. Everything, they have what's called a level of, they've gone from the imprint period, which was 0 to somewhere around 5 or 7, where they didn't question anything, they just absorbed everything. Then they start questioning things and making decisions. And this is the exciting part of being a child. This is when you really want to lock in your child's belief systems and ways of thinking, is between age, say, 5 to 7, when they come out of that imprint period, and they actually start thinking, and start developing their thinking from between 5 and 7 to before they hit that adolescent stage around 11, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. So say 12 to 13, okay? Before they get into this crazy adolescent phase, that's when you can really lock in the thinking. You can lock in the relationships. You can lock in the good habits and the good behaviors, because they are questioning it. They are consciously making these decisions, and they are deciding who they're going to be. That will see them very nicely through the adolescent stage, so remember that. But in the adolescent stage, again, practicing the independence, they're going to argue with you a little bit. And they're not arguing with you just because they're mad at you or to get at you. They need to argue to practice their arguing skills. If they can't argue when they get out of the house, and the only person they can really practice on is you, because their friends stink at it. They'll do some of that. Don't think they don't argue with their friends too. They do. They just don't do it in front of you. They do it, and they're practicing. This is a life skill. So as long as you don't let it get into the negative, arguing is fine. Me and my dad love to have a good argument, but because we had a good relationship, what we did is we were going to really go back and forth on it. But our theory was, and this is what kept it a positive in the relationship, was we were going to argue and argue and argue. And by the time we got done, and we had each listened to each other and argued back and forth, the truth would float to the top. So I would say, hey, Pop, no, it's really like this. But then I would listen to him. And he'd say, no, because, and if he made a good argument, I would accept that. And I'd say, okay, well, maybe not that. But how about this? And I'd argue another thing. He'd say, but no, kind of like this. And he would show me. And if he made a good argument and it made sense to me, I go, oh, yeah, you're kind of right. If not, I would argue back with him and say, no, Dad, you're not understanding. Let me show you from this angle. And he might go, okay, yeah, I could see that. Okay. I thought you meant this over here. Okay. And the truth would eventually float to the top, and we both learned something. And it was a great practice experience for me for arguing without getting upset, realizing that even when you argue, it can be just about getting to the truth, and that it's a learning experience. So that's how it worked for me. If you set it up with your child like this, then you'll have the same experience. So even when you argue, it shouldn't be about we're arguing and therefore I don't like you and you don't like me. No, it's we're going to have some back and forth. We're going to have a spirited debate, and that's just to get the truth to the top and to make sure that you're satisfied with the answer and I'm satisfied with the answer. And maybe we'll both learn something. Okay? They need to do a lot of questioning because that's how they learn about things. And that's great. Supply the best answers you can. And when they're not sure, let them do the experiment. Say, well, try it your way. That's okay. Ask somebody else. Send them to somebody else. My dad would refer me and say, well, ask your uncle what he thinks, or ask your brother what he thinks. You can refer them to other people. Say, check with your teachers. Ask your teacher about this. See if I'm wrong. He'd give me maybe a little financial advice. Say, well, you should do this and that, and there's something called compound interest. And I said, oh, that doesn't really matter. I said, well, ask your finance teacher about that. Or I'd have a sociological problem. I think they can just do this, and why can't governments just talk stuff out? I said, well, go ask your sociology teacher. See what he says. Okay? And then when my dad said something and I wouldn't listen to him, and then my sociology teacher, my finance teacher, told me about the same thing but a slightly different way, one of two things would happen. I would realize that my dad was right, but I just couldn't hear it from him. Or they would say it in a slightly different way, which gave me a fuller, richer understanding, and I would go, oh, that's why. And that missing piece would turn the light on. I go, oh, yeah, my dad was right. So kids are definitely going to go through these stages. It's okay. It's a good learning period, but be prepared for it. Now, I love this slide. It says, remember, they're not really aiming at you. This is just their way to adulthood. Try not to get run over. They are just working through issues and trying to struggle to become an adult. They have to test out some of these things in the home. They got two places to do it. They're going to do it at school. Most kids don't have a job, but kids come out great if you get them a part-time job. Try to get your kid when they're an adolescent a part-time job so they can experiment being out in the real world a little bit. That gives them a second avenue. And then the third avenue is at school and is with teachers. Okay? Sports are important because that gives them another avenue to try things out on other people. These are actually great things. And finally, they're going to experience times where, remember I said they go from independent to dependent? They're going to run back to you, just like when they were a little kid. And they're going to say, Mommy, Daddy, I need you, essentially. Or they won't say that, but they'll come over and they'll give you a hug. They'll spend more time with you. They'll hang out with the family more. All these types of things. and you'll have that same relationship, and you'll say, oh my goodness, this is just like when they were a kid. This is fantastic. But realize it's a back and forth. So, it's like the stock market. What comes after up? Down. What comes after down? Up. What comes after independent? Dependent. What comes after dependent? Independent. Okay? They're going to go back and forth. Just understand it. Think of it like the seasons of the year. Nothing wrong with it. So give them the love. Give them the support. These are the moments where they're going to have an opening where you can share things that when they're in their independent phase, they couldn't. So sometimes you can hearken back to some of those things. This happened to you. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Remember when we talked about, that's all I was trying to tell you. I was worried that this was going to happen. I was scared for you. I love you. I care about you. I was worried about you. Remember when we had that fight? I was worried this was going to happen to you. Don't tell them I told you so. Say, I was worried for you. I was scared. I do not want my child to be hurt. I don't want you to ever be hurt. Okay? So that kind of loving and caring and concern. This is a great chance to reconnect with the relationship. This is a chance to put some coin in the emotional bank account for when they're going to start rebelling and doing those types of things that they're absolutely supposed to do. So, you've got a lot of skills now, and we'll take these into the next section.